Picture this. You're the best paid worker in the ancient world. Not a farmer, not a soldier. You carve tombs. Royal tombs. The ones deep in the Valley of the Kings, where dead pharaohs get buried under a mountain of gold. You're elite, and everyone knows it. The pharaoh knows it. And every 10 days, without fail, the ration wagons roll into your village and dump the grain that feeds your family. Until one day, they don't. You wait a week, nothing. Another week, still nothing. So you and your crew stand up, walk out of the tombs, march past the checkpoint, and sit down in the dirt outside a temple, shouting one line over and over, "We're hungry." That actually happened around 1159 BC, and we know it happened because someone wrote it down on a scroll that's sitting in a museum in Turin right now. It's the first recorded strike in human history. Now hold that picture. Because a couple of centuries before this, a foreign king sat down and wrote a letter to the pharaoh. And he complained, not that Egypt had too little gold, but that it had too much. "Gold in your country," he wrote, "is dirt. You just gather it up. Gold like dirt." That was Egypt's reputation across the entire ancient world, the richest place a human being could imagine. So how do you get from there to a bunch of the pharaoh's own tomb builders sitting in the actual dirt, starving? How does the richest empire on earth run out of gold? To get how it ends, you've got to get how the money got made in the first place. And the whole thing, the gold, the temples, the god kings, runs on one engine: conquest. Around 1550 BC, Egypt kicks off what we call the New Kingdom, and for the next few generations, its pharaohs do something Egypt had never really committed to before. They march out. South first, into Nubia, what's now Sudan, because Nubia is where the gold is. The Egyptian word for gold was Nebu, and there's a running argument that the name Nubia itself might come from that, the land of gold. Scholars don't want to fully sign off on that etymology, so I won't force it either. What isn't up for debate is what was in the ground down there, the richest gold in their world, in the deserts of Nubia and the hills of Egypt's own eastern desert, and Egypt spent centuries clawing into them. We actually have their treasure map, the oldest geological map on Earth, a real piece of papyrus drawn around 1150 BC, showing a stretch of desert valley, the roads, the workers' huts, the notes scribbled next to the hills, the mountains where gold is found. That's not me paraphrasing, that's the caption, in Egyptian. And they march north too, into the Levant, modern Israel, Lebanon, Syria. In 1457 BC, a pharaoh named Thutmose III fights a battle at a city called Megiddo, which sounds like a Marvel villain, but is real and matters because it's the first battle in human history that anyone recorded in real detail, carved onto a temple wall at Karnak by his own scribe. He wins, and the tribute starts flowing home: gold, silver, cattle, timber, prisoners. That's the engine. You conquer land, you take the gold, you take the tribute, you use the wealth to build temples and armies, you use the armies to conquer more land. Rinse and repeat. And for a while, it works so well nobody stops to ask what happens when the ride ends. Want to know how rich this made them? Consider a kid you've heard of, Tutankhamun, Tut, a boy king, and by any honest measure, a minor one. He reigned 9 years, died young, barely made a dent in Egyptian history. His name wasn't a big deal until 1922, when an English archaeologist named Howard Carter cracked open his tomb almost untouched. And what did they find? A mask of solid gold weighing 22 pounds, and an innermost coffin, also solid gold, weighing more than 240. That's what they buried a nobody with. Now imagine what they buried the great ones with. But there's a crack sitting right inside all of that, and it's the first domino. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, you're the kind of person who actually wants to understand how empires rise and fall, not just hear the highlights. So do me a favor. Hit like and subscribe with the bell on. It's the simplest way to make sure the next story reaches you. Now, back to the fall of an empire. Gold feels infinite when you're swimming in it. Spoiler: it isn't. For all the gold-like dirt reputation, the actual amount of gold Egypt could physically pull out of the ground had a hard limit. Modern geologists have gone back to those old mines and done the math. Across their entire ancient history, The Egyptians probably yanked a couple dozen tons of gold out of that desert. That is staggering for the ancient world, but it isn't endless. And here's the trap. The engine only works if it keeps expanding. The tribute only flows if you keep conquering. The gold only comes if you keep holding the mines. So, what happens when the expansion stops? Because it does stop. By the 1200s BC, Egypt isn't a young, hungry, conquering kingdom anymore. It's old, it's rich, it's comfortable. The empire stops growing, so the new tribute stops coming. But nobody in charge stops spending. The god kings still want their temples, their monuments, their armies, their tombs, all the same size, ideally bigger. An empire that stopped earning more but didn't stop spending more is an empire on a countdown. And nobody in Egypt can see the clock. Yet. Now the second crack. And this one, the pharaohs did to themselves. Every time a pharaoh won a war, or wanted the gods on his side, or just needed a favor from the priesthood, he gave gifts, not small ones. Land, gold, cattle, entire estates, handed straight to the temples, and above all, to the temple of the god Amun at Karnak. It looked holy, it looked smart. Keep the gods happy, keep the priests loyal. Simple. But watch what it does over a few centuries. We have the receipts, literally. There's a papyrus in the British Museum that's 42 meters long, the longest ever found in Egypt, and it lists the donations of just one pharaoh, Ramesses III, to the temples. The numbers are wild: hundreds of thousands of sacks of grain, tens of thousands of people, ships, cattle, gold, land, by the acre, by the province. And here's the thing, it never comes back. A gift to the gods is forever. So generation after generation, more of Egypt's land, more of its gold, more of its workforce quietly slides out of the crown's hands and into the temples, and stays there. By the end of the New Kingdom, scholars estimate the temples were sitting on somewhere between an eighth and a fifth of every farmable acre in Egypt, and the priesthood of Amun had become something a lot more dangerous than a religion. It had become a rival government, a state inside the state, rich, permanent, and not really taking orders from anyone. The pharaoh was still the god on the throne, but quietly, the men actually running Egypt were the men in the temple. And then, right when Egypt is top-heavy, overcommitted, and bleeding wealth into its own temples, the whole world catches fire. Around 1200 BC, the entire Bronze Age world starts to collapse. Not just Egypt, everyone. The Hittites, Egypt's biggest rival to the north, gone. The Mycenaean Greeks, the world of the Iliad, gone. The great trading cities up and down the Mediterranean coast, cities that had been rich for centuries, burned, emptied. In the space of a couple of generations, the map of the known world is basically wiped clean. And we still argue about why. That's the honest answer. We argue. The old story used to pin the whole thing on mysterious raiders from the sea, the Sea Peoples, and Egypt did fight them. A pharaoh named Ramesses III carved a massive victory over them onto the walls of his temple around 1177 BC. But be careful with that carving, it's propaganda. It's a king advertising a win. And most historians now think the Sea Peoples weren't the cause of the collapse, they were a symptom of it. Refugees swept up in a bigger storm. The real killer was everything hitting at once: drought, failed harvests, earthquakes, the trade networks that fed all these kingdoms snapping at the same time. For Egypt, the piece that mattered most was the simplest one. The rains that fed the Nile started failing. And in Egypt, a bad Nile means a bad harvest, and a bad harvest means no grain. Which brings us right back to those starving workers. Because now, you know why they were starving. Here's something about the richest empire on earth that people miss. It had no money. Not the way we mean it. Egypt had no coins. Coined money doesn't get invented for centuries yet. So how do you pay a guy? You pay him in food. The elite tomb builders lived in a village called Deir el Medina, and their whole salary was sacks of grain, bread, and beer. As long as the grain wagons showed up, the system worked. It had always worked. And then the wagons stop. In the 29th year of Ramesses III, around 1159 BC, the rations at Deir el Medina come late, then they don't come at all. And remember who these guys are. These aren't poor men, these are the most privileged workers in the kingdom, and their food has simply stopped arriving. So they do something no one in history had ever put in writing before. They lay down their tools, they walk off, and they refuse to work until someone pays them. The first documented strike in human history. As far as we know, the first time anyone anywhere wrote this down. And it isn't slaves in revolt. It's the elite craftsmen of a broke empire, sitting in the dirt, chanting that they're hungry, in the country where gold used to be dirt. The gold isn't gone yet, but the machine that turned gold into bread, and bread into loyalty, that machine is starting to break. And once your best people are starving, everything downstream rots fast. Then Egypt loses the one thing the whole story was built on. It loses Nubia. As central authority weakens, the grip on the south slips. The Egyptian official running Nubia for the pharaoh gets pulled into Egypt's own civil disputes, marches north with an army, loses, and retreats back into Nubia with the gold lands under his arm. And that's it. Egypt's grip on Nubia is over. The gold tap, after 500 years, is turned off. So, you're a god king. Your mines are gone, your tribute is gone, your harvests are failing, your own priests own half the country. Where do you go for gold? You go where the gold already is. Underground. In the tombs. In the final century of the New Kingdom, a wave of tomb robberies rips through the Valley of the Kings, and we know about it in an insane level of detail because there were investigations and trials, and the paperwork survived. We even have a confession. A robber named Amenpnufer describes how he broke into a royal tomb, ripped the gold off the king and the queen inside, and split the loot with his gang. But here's the thing. These weren't some random criminals sneaking past the guards. A lot of the time, the guards were in on it. So were the officials. So were the priests. The very institutions built to protect the dead kings were quietly robbing them. And it gets darker, because the people running that quiet robbery may have been the priesthood itself. Around 1070 BC, the New Kingdom just ends. Egypt splits in two. The pharaohs, what's left of them, rule the north from a city in the delta. And the south, the old heartland, Thebes, the Valley of the Kings, all of it, is now run outright by the high priests of Amun. The temple never had to overthrow the throne in the end. It just outlived it. And those priests, now sitting on top of the royal dead, did something that tells you exactly how far Egypt had fallen. They went into the tombs of the greatest pharaohs who ever lived, Thutmose, Seti, Ramesses the Great himself. They pulled the mummies out, unwrapped them, stripped the gold and the jewels off their bodies, rewrapped them in plain linen, and hid them together in a secret cache in the cliffs. The official reason was protection from robbers. But look at what actually happened. The most powerful men in the history of the world got quietly stripped of their gold by their own priests. And that gold went straight back into circulation to prop up a state that had run out. That's the answer. That's how the pharaohs ran out of gold. Not in one disaster, in a slow bleed over 500 years. An empire that treated a finite thing as if it were infinite, that conquered until it couldn't, and kept spending long after it stopped earning. That gave its wealth to its temples until the temples owned the country. That lost the mines, lost the harvests, lost the tribute. And in the end, went digging up its own god kings to scrape the gold off their bones. Remember that foreign king, centuries earlier, needling the pharaoh in a letter? Gold in your country is dirt. You just gather it up. By the end, he was right, just not in the way he meant. Egypt's gold really did go back into the dirt, buried, stolen, melted down, scattered, pulled out of the tombs of the very kings who once had so much of it. They honestly could not imagine it running out. There's one last thing worth sitting with. A story survives from right at the end, and historians think it's more literature than reporting. So take it as a mood, not a receipt. About an Egyptian priest sent abroad to buy timber. Once, the pharaoh's name alone would have opened any door on the Mediterranean coast. Now, he gets kept waiting, haggled with, treated like a broke man, because everyone up there already knew what Egypt was still pretending not to. The gold was gone, and the god kings were just men after all.